So you can hear me all, until the music starts anyway. Welcome this afternoon. This is our second time here at YBC. We really appreciate them making us available with the convention centers not. And today is a special day because it's kind of the end of Hispanic Heritage Month, and our fearless member Sonia has arranged for a great mariachi band to be here. And you heard them when you came in, you just heard them when you were sitting down, and now you can hear them as our music. And I'm sure you can sing along. So it's all up to you. If you want to play another number, that would be great. Yeah, that would be wonderful. sol en cielo, la luna y el mar. Sol en cielo, la luna y el mar. Standing ovation. Thank you very much. Sonia will wrap up our Hispanic Heritage Month in just a moment, but I feel like I should have been wearing my Carmen Miranda hat instead of this one. But the fruit is falling off, which is kind of par for the course these days. But anyway, with our invocation, Rick Pinnell.
Thank you. And just a few thoughts. Oh, by the way, yesterday was my first day of being 76, so I went up to do a little hike up in Nancy's Peak, but I went to but it was snowing, and I went down to Lake Tipso, and my dog and I were the only people walking in 4 inches of snow in a snowstorm, and that was like being in heaven. So I just want to share a few thoughts today, and then we'll say a prayer. Let your smile change the world, but do not let the world change your smile. Start with a smile for your fellow man, no matter who or where you are. Watch their eyes raise, your face change. Just with a good morning and a smile, you will make their life better, and you'll make yours better. Let us pray. Holy Father, help us recognize our fellow man with a smile and a greeting. Help us to share our gifts to help and support our fellow man. Guide us to do even the smallest of things with great love, and assuring that we can make a difference in our life, others' lives, our community, and the world. Amen.
Thank you, Rick. And now, as you know, we've been celebrating each week something to do with our Hispanic heritage and Hispanic heritage of people who live in the Yakima Valley, and kind of leading that charge or leading that great celebration has been Sonia Rodriguez-True, and she is here again today, amazingly, to speak to us a bit, to kind of put a kind of a coda on the end of the month.
Felix has assured me that next year we are going to definitely hear from him and about his Cuban heritage, which I think is something that is very important to remember when we're considering this month. And hopefully, possibly, maybe even his wife to sing. So hopefully we can look forward to that next year when we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. So you heard from Carmen last week about what Hispanic Heritage Month is all about. And when I heard this music today, the mariachi music, it's really a staple in my family, and it's a staple particularly in my grandmother's home, who I told you about a couple weeks ago. It's something that you hear whenever we go to her home, and so I get really, just like Carmen said last week, I get really emotional about when I think about her and this music, because it reminds me, it's a constant reminder of all of the struggles that she and my other family have went through so that I can actually get to this place. A couple of things I want us to keep in mind when we are thinking about Hispanic Heritage Month and we're remembering is that us Latinos will be the majority in this country by the year 2045. So we're growing at a very fast rate, and in fact, we comprise more than 50% of the population here in Yakima County. But I also want, while you take note of that, I also want you to take note of the fact that when you look around, those numbers are not the same in this room, and those numbers are normally not the same in the professional environments that we all find ourselves in. And that's not just a coincidence. That's not something that just happens. There is a reason for that. And I I want us to all, when we think about Hispanic Heritage Month and going forward from today, I want us all to remember that and to think on it and to act on it. One of the other things that always strikes me as really profound is that when you look at the Yakima School District, for example, I would say about 80% of the students there are Latino. But likewise, there is a high poverty rate there. And again, that doesn't happen just by coincidence. There are reasons for that. Just when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, last night, there was a shooting. And when you think about gangs and when you think about those issues, you may think about Latinos. And there's reasons for that. And I want us to all care about those reasons, and I want us to all act on those reasons. As the granddaughter of a former cotton picker, and my grandmother went on to pick oranges in California, somehow I was able to make it, her granddaughter, able to make it to be the first woman of color judicial officer in this county outside of tribal court. An amazing to not only recognize that and I'm so proud to be that, being her granddaughter, because I know she struggled. I know she endured a lot. I know she went through a lot, as many of our Latino families do. But someone extended the hand to me. Someone said, here's your opportunity for education. Here is your chance to do something bigger than what you were set up to do. And that made all of the difference for me. And so my question for you today is, how are we going to obviously extend our hands to others? I joined Rotary because we have a central mission of service to others, and we have a profound influence in this community. I always say the most serious problems that our community faces in this community can be solved by the people in this room. We don't want a gang problem, we don't want a homeless problem, we don't want the poverty issues, we don't want the drug issues in our community. We can solve them. The people in this room, we have the resources, we have the influence, we have the power to solve those problems. And so I want us to remember when we're, I guess, closing out our celebration of this month, to our obligation, our responsibility to our community to create a more inclusive environment, to extend those hands of opportunity, to care about the root problems of poverty and other factors that influence our community, our Latino community locally, to ask the questions, the difficult questions, to have great conversations about why there's not more of us in this room, and that we want more of us in this room. That's what I want to see outside of this as a result of this celebration for Hispanic Heritage Month. Our culture, our heritage, our contributions are phenomenal and significant. But that going forward is the questions that we should be asking ourselves and the action that should be taken from celebrating this month. So thank you, President Tom. Thank you all. If you have ideas in the future of how we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, please let me know. I'd love to hear them.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Great, great words to take to heart there. Now, few announcements. If anyone has a guest at your table, just kind of shout out. I see a few in the room. Not too many. There's one right there, Marge Henderson. There's Greg Nelson over here. We have Mr. Dolan here. Anyone else? So, oh, right, with Lisa. Right, hi there. So anyway, welcome all. And again, membership forms are always available. One thing before we go any further that really needs to be shouted out is a great, huge thank you to the Operation Harvest group. Quinn, Amy, and all the people who put out signs, who contributed money, who collected food, who passed out bags, all the different people that did that. I think you saw in the paper that we're estimating 90,000 pounds of food, which is the greatest record ever. We don't have all the results yet. And Carolyn's not here. She's off in Cincinnati having a good time with Fred Fairbrook at the large club conference, but we don't have all the details. yet on it, so you'll hear more next week. But Lorna is overwhelmed with food still in the office, and there's more coming in. So thank you all very much. It was a great effort on everyone's part and extremely successful. So again, a round of applause to Amy, Quinn, and all the people who put this together. And Pete Bansberg. Yeah, I was right. I remember that too. Last week I introduced him for Operation Harvest, but he was supposed to talk on the food bank. So I'm not going to tell you. I don't know what I'm doing. Couple announcements. I'll tell you quickly things coming up related. One, I think maybe some of you have already heard about Rotary is getting kind of re-energized after the year of the pandemic. And they're having a Seahawks viewing party on November 29th. There will be more information about this, but tickets will be available at Eventbrite and at the door. And it's a great opportunity to support them and support the Rotary program as well as their project. So keep November 29th coming up right away. But closer and even more fun, if it's possible to be more fun than the Seahawks, is the Harvest Marching Band Festival, which is this Saturday, October 16th. They'll have benefit to Davis and Ike marching bands, and there are lots of opportunities to be there. I was in marching band myself, believe it or not. I actually managed to make those formations with the big D and the DSHS, which was for Dubuque Senior High School, and lots of other forms. The worst one I might add is when we had to do Mickey Mouse. I was not good on ears. But anyway, this is a great opportunity, and Amanda will be more than happy to celebrate your volunteering with free admission anytime, and you can volunteer anytime from 10 in the morning to 6 in the morning till 10 at night. So that's lots of opportunities, and I know that some of you will want to be there the whole time. So anyway, with that, I think that's my announcements for today. And now we go to roundup time with Nancy Leahy, who is our Sergeant at Arms.
Thank you, John. First time in this room, what a treat. And boy, the first time and the launching of the new Rotary year is what I'm going to talk about today with the Rotary Roundup. And take a look at the first quarter of the year, and hopefully you got your dollars out, right? You can sign one of these and turn it in otherwise. You see a posse surrounding this room. That's our Sergeant at Arms posse, and they're ready to collect. And if you can't get somebody to you fast enough, just put that hat over in the middle of your table and drop your bucks in there. That'll work just fine. Because yahoo! I want to welcome you to October. We're off to a stampede start in this Rotary year, and I will ask you to join us in celebrating these events that have taken place in John's presidential year. Accomplishments of just the first quarter, if you can believe. Why a roundup, you might want to ask? Why a roundup? Well, rolling, 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 keep Rotary rolling by COVID. Keep our Rotary rolling, though meetings were stolen. Rotary meetings you can hear on Zoom. There's more. The sanitation were tethered in masks made of leather, wishing our friends were by our side. All things that were missing, good fiddles, hugs, and kissing. Soon we will enjoy and abide. So move them up, head them up, move them up, move them up, move them up, move them up, Rotary! Cut them on, get them in, going on. Roll on, Rotary! Woo! So now, if you were a part of any of these activities that I'm listing, please pay $1 to Rotary Charity. And we're going to give a Yahoo to you for these months of activities. And I see Rich up there, and he's listening in to us, Doug Rich, and he can collect from all of you Zoomers too. So let's look at the month of July. If you participated in any of these things, please hold your dollar up for the Rotary Posse. Rotary Playground completion and dedication was in July, and so was the Molly Davis Trust Golf Tournament. And the monthly investment meeting took place. That's the second Tuesday of every month. If you attend, thank you for your dollar for Rotary Charities. Now, how about the whole room? I want to hear from you. How about a Yahoo!
Yahoo!
Thank you. Now on to August, where we had the Rotary non-picnic picnic. If you came, we thank you. Please contribute $1. Also, the Rotary Book Club meeting took place. And then the big event, face-to-face meetings right here in a brand new location. So let's hear a Yahoo for August. Yahoo! Now on to September. Scholarship dinners kicked us off. And if you attended or you were one of those sacred cooks, we sure thank you. Please pay $1. If you participated in Fair Day or Fair Food Day, please pay $1 for your participation. And the Youth Exchange Information Night was also in September. How about a big Yahoo for September?
Yahoo!
Okay. Now on to October. Well, it was Rotary Rover membership meet and greet. Now, if you took place in this dog loving membership meeting, please pay $1. And then came Operation Harvest, just fresh on our that what John was just mentioning was signs up, donations, and pickup. Please pay $1. And how about this one for the membership committee? 4 new Rotary members since July 1st. Yahoo for October. Yahoo! Okay. We couldn't be prouder. We thank you for your time and your contributions to Rotary. And thank you, Posse, for being so quick. Now it's time to head out on the range because, you know, Rotary Range, where the members and officers play, where usually is heard an encouraging word, and the skies are sunny all day.
Thank you. I think this club is turning into a music club. So, so that means that, of course, somewhere along the line, I'll have to sing. So just keep that forward. Just keep that in mind. But on a more serious and much more pleasant note, it is time for our speaker introduction with none other than Dr. Linda Kavitsky, coming to us from across the street via the miracle of Zoom.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, excuse me, Jeff Antonellis Lapp. Now, Jeff and I have 3 things in common. We both worked at a Washington State institution of higher education. And we have both been at our colleges for over 2 decades. And number 3, we are both in awe of Mount Rainier. So Jeff was a, excuse me, was a faculty member at the Evergreen State College for over 23 years. And in 2015, he was honored with the title Emeritus Professor. At Evergreen, he taught classes in Native American Studies, environmental education, and natural history. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental education from Huxley College of Western Washington University and a Master of Science in Science Education from the University of Washington. After graduating from Western, Jeff worked 2 summers at Mount Rainier National Park, igniting a connection to the mountain that endures today. He has summited the mountain, hiked all of its mapped trails, and completed the 93-mile Wonderland Trail 5 times. Unable to find a current text for Mount Rainier Natural History for a course he planned to teach, Jeff began writing the book himself. He conducted over 250 days of field work for the book, many of them in the company of park archaeologists, biologists, and geologists. Last year, WSU Press published Tahoma and Its People, His Natural History of Mount Rainier National Park. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Antonella Slapp.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Great to be with you. Really a pleasure. I'm coming to you from Enumclaw, Washington. And on a good day, we can see the mountain right out the window here. And that's about 10 days a year, right? But anyway, it's really good to be with you. Thank you, Linda, for a great introduction. And most of everything she said is pretty much the truth, most of it anyway. And any falsehoods are my fault. So I'm going to share a lot of images with you. And so folks that are at Yakima Valley College, you might want to make sure that you can see the screen well. I don't know if you want to take the lights down in the room or not, but I'm going to switch right now, share my screen, and let you take a look at the first image, and then we'll get started. So most of the stories that I'm going to share with you today are from my natural history of Mount Rainier National Park that Linda mentioned. Tahoma and Its People. You might know that Tahoma is one of several Native American names for the mountain. And if you'd like me to talk a little bit more about that, about the history or the meaning of that, just let's allow some time for questions and give you a chance to ask about that when we get to it. All right, just making sure I got all my tech here together. And thank you for the folks that have helped set things up today too to make this possible. Really appreciate your help. As I get started, I always like to give some recognition to a couple of groups of people that have really been helpful to me in my research. Many years before I even started work on Tahoma, I was welcomed onto Indian reservations in Western Washington. And I was there to teach. I was actually asked to come onto the Muckleshoot Indian Reservation to teach, but to tell you the truth, I learned more from folks there, I think, than I ever taught. And because of their kindness, one of the things that I was able to study at Muckleshoot was the Lushootseed language. Actually, I studied the Southern dialect that's called Lushootseed, and I have still studied it now for over 20 years. So I could say to you, eh, chuff siaya, eh, chuff siaya. Hello, friends. Welcome, family and friends. Lushootseed would have been one of the original languages in the Puget Trough, and was probably one of the first languages that the trees heard as people walked through the forest thousands of years ago. People also taught me how to go into the forest with them and gather red cedar bark, which is really hard work. And I think they probably knew that I had a good, strong back and that I was some good free labor. And then they later taught me how to do some weaving with red cedar bark as well. And these things, I think, kind of enabled me to understand a little bit of their stories of their ancestors going up to Tahoma over the generations. So what I'm going to talk with you about today is, excuse me, I'm a little distracted. I've got something in my screen here that I'm trying to make go away. There we go. These stories, so many stories to talk with you about. And I'm going to share with you part of one of my favorite talks that I give from the book. It's called Tahoma's Biggest Stories. And the two biggest things that I learned in my research, one was that people have been going up to the mountain for over 9,000 years. This is relatively recent information, believe it or not, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the other big story is about that the effects of climate change at Mount Rainier we are finding are quite far-reaching. But today, in just the time that we have, what I'm going to talk with you about is the cultural aspect. That is this idea that people have been going to Mount Rainier for thousands of years. Why did they go there? Where did they go? What sort of activities did they engage in? So let's get started. We're going to begin with Lieutenant Couts. He was an Army lieutenant stationed at Fort Steilacoom, about 60 miles from the mountain on a clear day. It looks like the mountain is just out your front door. And Couts, like myself and probably some other folks in on this call today, became obsessed with the mountain, mesmerized by it. And he planned to climb it. And one of the interesting things I learned in my research is of European Americans in that time in the West had this abiding notion that Native people avoided the high country. And this is reflected in one of Couts's journal entries where he wrote that information relating to the mountain was exceedingly meager. No white man had ever been near it, and Indians were superstitious and afraid of it. Superstitious and afraid. And this shows up in journal entries all throughout the literature in this particular time period. Ironically, Couch was helped to a large extent by Native American people. He had become friends with Leshai, who was a noted Nisqually leader. Leshai suggested that he take a route up the Nisqually River Valley. And Leshai also said, you probably need a guide, so you need to hire someone. And Couch hired Wapaweti, who was another native who was from Leshai's home village. So he was really helped, as were other folks who also attempted to climb or summited the mountain, were helped by Native American people. But this idea that natives avoided the high country was persistent for decades and decades and decades. And it wasn't until the 1960s when a professor from WSU arranged to do some interviews of tribal elders at Yakima, on the reservation there, at Nisqually, and at Muckleshoot. And what Dr. Smith learned from these elders was that they and their ancestors had been going up into the mountains for as long as anybody could remember. They told him things, and he was able to bring forward information that up to that time was not widely known. The elders told him, for example, that they had gone into the mountains to hunt mountain goat. Well, here's an animal that is not available down near their lowland villages. Very warm wool, thick hides. These blankets and robes that could be woven from the mountain goat wool were really valuable and could last for generations. They also told Dr. Smith that people went into the mountain also for marmots, to hunt hoary marmots. These were also sewn into robes or blankets. And marmot was on the diet of some Native American groups. They also went to the high country for lots of other reasons. Plants for medicinal, technological reasons, and for food. This you might know as bear grass. This is a member of the lily family, and those long leaves that are coming from the base of the plant were harvested, processed, and then later used as part of the design pattern in basket making. One of the biggest draws, we think, of people to the mountain, believe it or not, was huckleberries, really. And we could arm wrestle whether they're wild blueberries or huckleberries, but the truth is that these 4 species of vaccinium were highly sought by Native people. They taught themselves how to dry them once they picked them up on the mountain. And now, of course, we're talking about folks going up into the mountains in midsummer, late summer, when the snows have melted back, when the weather is fair, and they would pick these berries and then they would dry them or smoke them, if you would, over a low burning fire. They would build a rack over a fire and then put a mat down and then put the berries on top of the mat to dry the berries. And then when they headed back down to their village, they would take them with them, rehydrate them over the winter months. Turns out huckleberries are a really important source of vitamin C in early Native American diets. So in his interviews, Dr. Smith also learned a little bit about how people approached the mountain. And he learned from the elders that people basically came to the mountain from the watersheds within which they lived. So if you look at this image, and if you can see my pointer, this is basically to symbolize the summit of the mountain. And you can see what look like tentacles. These are to show you the glacier. So this would have been the Emmons Glacier here. This would be the Winthrop Glacier, etc. And the Native people thought of the mountain in sections, and they basically shared it roughly along ridge lines, like these heavy gray lines here suggest. So there's no doubt that other native groups also came to the mountain, but these were the 5 primary groups that came forward in Smith's discussion with the elders. He also learned that people came from their villages. And so I put a star, these main population centers in the Puget Sound area. And if you use the scale, see that in the bottom of the map, you can see real quickly that even the closest villages were more than 30 miles away from the mountain. And people traveled on foot. Horses, a relatively recent convention in this area, only in use for the last few hundred years. So for thousands of years, people approached the mountain on foot. Folks from Yakima traveled over 80 miles on foot. So 3 or 4 or 5 days or more, we think, to get to the mountain, often traveling in family groups with children, aunties and uncles, grandparents, extended family. And I would like to mention that a friend of mine in Yakima, local attorney Ray Pelella, has done an enormous amount of work on his own time to reconstruct some of the original trails from Yakima that lead up to Mount Rainier. And about 8 or 9 years ago, Ray and I spent 4 days retracing some of that original trail that's now known as the William O. Douglas Trail. And Ray was largely responsible for a lot of the research that went into finding that trail. Anyway, all of this, I think, shows us that there's a really strong pull of people to the mountain. And it was for these resources principally. Other reasons as well, but mostly to access resources they didn't have in their or near their lowland villages. So after his interviews, Dr. Smith gave his data over to his colleague, Dr. Richard Daugherty. That fall, Daugherty went off with some graduate students in search of some archaeological sites, potential sites to excavate. Working on a tip from a park ranger, they found a rock shelter. If you see the image here, you can see this, not quite a cave, but a rock shelter. And what they found there on the northeastern side of the mountain, well, they didn't find me. I came later. What they found was a little campsite, probably used by Yakima and Klickitat hunters for over 1,500 years. When they excavated the site, they found things like stone tools, blades, scrapers, projectile points. Here's a close-up of a projectile point. Other sites were soon to become added to the park's archaeological record. And the person who is really so responsible for the development of that, and a lot of what we know about the park's archaeology and the relation between native people and the mountain, is this fellow right here, Greg Burchard, now retired, the park archaeologist. He's actually working in a unit near Indian Henry's hunting ground on the park's southwest side. We found artifacts here over 7,000 years old. And you notice myself here and some of the others standing around in the usual loafers pose. You notice that, hands on hips. Greg was a real go-getter and a real great person in terms of representing the park and reaching out to local tribes to get them involved in the work. In the background here is the present park archaeologist, Ben Diaz, and Ben continues to reach out to the tribes as he continues his archaeological work at the mountain. One of my favorite spots is up at Sunrise. I think of this as an ancient campground. These were students participating in a field camp that was run by Central Washington University for a number of years. And what we know now is that people probably from Yakima villages and also people on the White and Green Rivers that would now be considered Muckleshoot tribal members came to this spot in midsummer, set up camp, and then again went about the business of looking for and collecting the resources that I'm talking with you about. These two students are excavating a fire hearth, and a fire hearth is like a treasure chest of information. Here is the completed hearth, and you see this is actually the fire pit in the lower right-hand corner here. And of course you would expect to find charcoal, right? Fire charred rock, but how about finding bits of bone or teeth or plant material that can be analyzed? And these are clues to when people were here, what they did, the kind of things that were on their diet. And I like to think of this fire hearth and imagine, what it would have been like to sit around a fire, because most of us that have been around campfires, we know they're a place of warmth, right? Of unity, of fellowship. We eat together, we tell stories. Some of us tell fibs together, you know? So we might do music, we might sing around a fire. And I like to imagine what it might have been like at this site 4,000 years ago to sit around that campfire while people were working their stone tools for the next day or cooking food or telling stories about their day. So as I wrap this up, I just want to share with you, these are some of the sites, over 100 sites at Mount Rainier. Each dot represents a camp or a isolated find, like someone found where people had been working tools, some chipstone debris. And I think of these as adding great value to the legacy of Native American people. And as we add more sites each year, it just increases the value of what we know about the presence of people at Mount Rainier. And it gives me a really good feeling. Just this idea of these are like beads to me on a necklace that surround Tahoma. And the more beads that we add to the necklace increases the value of what we know about it. So I know that I've really been affected by learning about the Native people at Mount Rainier, their presence. It makes me understand now that I always walk in the footsteps of the ancients at the mountain. And I'd encourage you to think about that the next time that you go out exploring in your area as well. So I want to thank you for your time and your attention. If you're interested in Tahoma and its people, the book, it's easy to get either from my website or maybe your local bookseller or online, of course. And I hope we have a little bit of time left so I can take some of your questions. So I'm going to stop my screen share and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We certainly do have time for questions. And I think probably the best way is for me to relay them from here. Any of you that are on Zoom, I think if you put them in chat, I think Dwayne or somebody can watch for them and I can respond to that. So, any questions? Will come up? Hi, how you doing, George?
Thinking in the Yakima paper today about how national parks do not refer to the history of indigenous people in parks. I was wondering if Mountain Rainier National Park has any kind of information available up there about the indigenous people and their activities on the mountain.
I don't know if you can hear that, Jeff.
Sorry, I couldn't. Could you replay it?
Yeah, yes. Jeff, what he's asking about is there was an article in today's paper about the fact that most national parks do not really recognize as an interpretation the indigenous people's presence on those lands. And he wanted to know if Mount Rainier, in fact, does do that.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. And like many national parks, Mount Rainier has had a checkered history in its relationship with Native people. There's a story in the book about Yakima Indians being arrested by park rangers for exercising what they understood to be their right to hunt within on park lands that had been their regular and accustomed lands for generations. Largely because of Greg Burchard's efforts that started in the 1990s. Greg was really concerned about reaching out to the local tribes, and he really started, I think, to heal and mend and rebuild some of those relationships with the Native tribes, involving them actively in dialogue on committees and actually in some of the excavations. And I think that has gone a ways toward rebuilding some of that and honoring some of that. Also, because of Greg's influence, the park completely revamped its displays at the Paradise Visitor Center and also at the Sunrise Visitor Center. So they're now a more accurate representation of the presence of Native people. And now each year the park rangers receive training in, before the season starts, a little bit of information about the role of Native people at the mountain so that they can share that with park visitors. So it's not perfect, but I believe that it's come a long ways in the last 25 or 30 years.
Yeah. Jeff, this is Dwayne. Doug Rich is asking, was there evidence of tribes meeting together at the mountain?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for your question, Doug. And yes, there is evidence. And in fact, that one site that I showed you that's near Sunrise, where the students are reaching the units there. That is on the way up to Sunrise proper. And the information based on on what the archaeologists do is I think they kind of figure out based on the stone tools, they could figure out that these would have been from Yakima people from the central Washington, and these would have been from Puget Trough people. So we know that at least at that site, there was an intermix. And we also know that people had this very elegant idea of marrying beyond their village, marrying into other groups. And what that did was that would assure safe passage, right? So you could go into, you could accidentally stumble into someone else's territory, but you're related to them. And so that would really kind of keep the temperature down, if you know what I mean. And so there's no question that people probably met at other places on the mountain just to visit, to exchange goods, maybe to trade. People coming over from Yakima would have had things that people coming from the Puget Trough wanted, and there was probably an interchange of some goods at some of these sites as well. Thanks for the question.
Being that the Yakimas are so close to Mount Adams, what is the relationship to Mount Adams as compared to Mount Rainier with the Yakimas?
Oh, wow, what a great question. So the question is, since Yakima are so close to Mount Adams, what would have been the relationship between, traveling to Mount Adams and Mount Rainier? And actually, I don't really know. I can tell you that that's the first time that I've gotten that question over dozens of book talks. It's a really interesting thing to think about. And one of the things that we would have to think about would be the distance that people would have had to travel. That would have been a factor. So when Ray Paolela and I retraced this trail back in 2013, we started at Davis High School in Yakima because that was the alma mater of Chief Justice Douglas, right? We rode our bikes and we actually stopped at the site of an ancient Yakima village on the way out to Coeechee Canyon. So I think if you did the math, I'm only guessing that those folks from that village would have had a closer grasp to Mount Rainier than to go to Mount Adams. But other folks, other native folks that lived closer to Mount Adams, obviously probably would have gone there for convenience. I would imagine the resources availability would be very similar. I don't know like about mountain goats to the extent at Mount Adams as at Mount Rainier. There's still a lot of goats at Mount Rainier, but those would be the kind of things that I would think about when I would try to wrestle with a question like that.
Hi, Jeff. A few years ago, I was working with the National Congress of American Indians, and they were working on a fascinating project to document climate change via the spoken word and history of tribal elders. They were working on getting funding for that, and I was curious: is that something that you are familiar with? And if so, have you been able to learn interesting information about climate change within Washington State just through the history of Native Americans?
No, I should know more about that actually. I have a colleague at the Evergreen State College. His name is Grossman, Zoltan Grossman, and he's actually done some writing, worked with Native people a lot, and has done an extensive amount of work on climate change. And maybe over the winter, I ought to like dig his book out of my stack of books and take a look. So I'm sorry, I don't know more about that, but it is a really interesting idea when you think about the cultural knowledge that people have built over thousands of years, and then that people being observers of their environment, being very aware, noticing the changes over time and how that might be really instrumental and important to scientists today. So appreciate your question. I'm sorry I can't do more with it.
Jeff, did your research come across evidence where any of the local tribes would actually try to climb the mountain or even summit the mountain?
So the question about Native people in either climbing on the mountain or summiting the mountain, and yes, there is quite a bit in the literature about that. There was a group of Yakima Indians that were accompanied by a European American. His name was Brown, Allison Brown, I believe. And I think this was in the 1880s. They're on record as having kind of abandoned their hunting trip and climbed up onto the mountain. Not sure, it doesn't seem that they summited, but they got very high onto the mountain. And that was a group of Yakima Indians. There's also some really interesting oral histories, a couple of stories that are told by different Puyallup tribal members. And this story is called Young Man's Ascent of Mount Rainier. And each of these versions begin by saying the person in this story was a real man. This story is not a myth. The other story says, my grandfather's grandfather did this. And it's basically the story of a young man climbing to the top of the mountain in what you and I might consider like a vision quest, and seeing something on the mountain at the summit that only someone who had been there would know that it existed. And that is actually an underground lake that is in a cave on the mountain. And I'm not making this up, it still exists. National Geographic is doing some research recently on this underground lake in this cave at the summit. And these young men told the story of encountering that on their climb. So pretty credible evidence of somebody, having been on the mountain. And there are other incidents as well of Native people, if not summiting, at least being on the mountain, being on the glaciers.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was incredible.
Thank you. Hey, if I could just add, and I'll talk to Linda about this. I have other talks. If you folks would like me to do more at another time, Linda and I could talk. I'm just really, as you know, I just love the mountain and I love to share this stuff with other folks. So I really thank you for the opportunity. And maybe if it works out, maybe I could be back with you some other time. Thanks again, everybody.
We're giving a book to one of the community centers here in their library. This book is on sanctuary and it deals with the near future and a young family, a young girl and her brother trying to find sanctuary in a kind of a changed world. So that could also speak to the mountain. This actually also speaks to one of our programs coming up. I'm sure we'll be to talk about the mountain here in exhibit, which will be at the museum. And some of those topics will certainly come up, I'm sure, particularly on climbing it. But I thought I would bring up one little piece today. Between 1966 and 1972, the Chamber of Commerce here in Yakima used to run a mass climb for amateurs up Mount Adams, not Mount Rainier, but Mount Adams. They would hike up and leave at 1 a.m. in the morning and climb up Mount Rainier. And there usually were about 500 people. But one of the things that I found most interesting about it and how times have changed, in 1968, there was always a lead party who would go up first. In this case, it was led by the then Governor Dan Evans and our own local Bob Lynch, who some of you may remember from Lynch Oldsmobile. And he was actually one of the leaders of that particular climb in 1968. But what he did, which I found quite fascinating, is he carried to the top of the mountain signal mirrors. He was in the advanced assault party. And these specially prepared mirrors with aiming devices of the U.S. Air Forces embedded in their centers, Lynch would use the sun to flash to Yakima and vicinity news of the first arrivals of the mountain. So if you could think about that, now you carry this tiny little cell phone up there and you could call down and take a picture and send it down instantaneously. He was hauling these 30-inch mirrors up the mountain so he could reflect the story down there. So just see how times have changed of course, that was long before most of our lifetimes in 1968, but more or less. But anyway, and with that, next week, we will be back at the convention center. It should be something that might be near and dear to the heart of a few of you, which is Alex Barth, who is the CEO of John I. Hawes. The CEO himself will be speaking about beer, of all things. And so I think it should be a pretty interesting program. And I look forward to seeing you at the convention center next week. And with that, will there be samples? I don't know. Where's John Cooper? John Cooper, tell us about that. And I know the catering team is here, so we'll have to talk to them about that. Yeah. So if they do, they have to have the big star beer from my hometown. So just to bring it a hometown. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.